We're going to start off with the Harris County judges race. Now, for those of you that are new to the debate, so to speak, Harris County judge is not like a judge like guilty, your honor kind of judge. Harris County judge is actually more of a county manager. And the interesting thing about the Harris County judgeship is the fact that it's managing a budget that is larger than some foreign countries. It's a very, very big job. And it's been occupied of late by Dora the Explorer, and it's her first real job. She never really had a job prior to this. She did work for a media outlet that was run by George Soros Incorporated, but prior to that, she never had a real job, and of course, now she's been down here, and I guess her main claim to fame is she has managed to shut down the Houston economy, force everyone to wear masks, and just generally create havoc. And, of course, she's been working for the de facto county judge, and that will be Rodney African Art Ellis, so named because there was this huge county warehouse where there was a lot of African art stored. Nobody knew who it really belonged to. And when the news media got down there to report on it, Rodney Ellis showed up and said, "You guys can't be in here." And it was out of the news cycle, and we never saw it again. But he is the de facto county judge right now, and I'm fortunate enough to have live here in the studio Alexandra de Morral Mueller, and she is running for Harris County judge, and she's a new name. She's not a politician, and we're going to get to know her just a little bit better. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Alexandra de Morral Mueller.
Thank you for having me.
So that's the full name, and I know you're Hispanic in origin?
Second generation, so I'm half Spanish, half Scottish. Proud of, my full family.
All right, well, that's an interesting combination.
Means, I have a temper and like to fight.
we could use somebody with a little Scottish integrity when it comes to our budgeting here in Harris County. So you're married?
I am.
Children?
I have 2 young children. I guess I've been married for almost 15 years now.
15? Well, you're still newlyweds. I'm impressed.
Exactly. And 2.5-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old son.
All right. I've been married for 50 years. That's why I say that. So.
I'm catching up.
All right. Well, I'm really glad to have you here today. What in the world would cause you to want to become the Harris County judge? I mean, you're not a political person, at least in the past.
The short answer is we reached the point, and I say we as my family, where thought about picking up and moving. Specifically going to Huntsville, Texas. And in the background, so my husband and I are both military. I probably lived in 8 different states and a few countries that aren't so great during my 5 years in the Army. And so we really wanted to settle somewhere and make it home. And, really did fall in love with Houston specifically because this is one of the few, I think, great American cities left. Where it is a meritocracy. You could come here without connections, and people really do value you based on your merit. It's what can you do for me, not who do you know. I think that's very much Dallas that has that. And
my wife didn't like Dallas. We lived up in the North Dallas area for a few years.
And I have family up around Dallas, and it is different. And so I think there is something very special about Houston or Harris County more broadly. And I moved my whole family down with us when we decided to start our family. So my mom and little brother live down the street. My husband's family, they're originally from Ohio, now live here. Both of us have military background families. And it very clearly or quickly became under Lena Hidalgo's tenure where you didn't feel like you lived in Texas anymore. Certainly not a free state. Where she really did carve this out to be a blue island, where you didn't have any of the benefit of good conservative governance. And, for me, actually, the first thing that I saw was the switch in crime. So always had petty crime in the neighborhood and, was at tolerable levels, and you hate to compromise, but there was just that generic level of crime we're all used to.
Well, I can see why you'd want to move to Huntsville. You see, in Huntsville, they have all the criminals in the prison.
Exactly.
Here in Harris County, they're running City Hall.
That is a key distinction. I have a lot of ammo up there, too, with able ammo.
So, well, yeah, it's a bad situation here in Harris County. When I came here in 1987, I came here because it was a very conservative city. solid Republican stronghold. But then somehow all of these Democrat votes magically appeared all in one particular election, and it's never gone back the other way. And it's mind-blowing to me. I'm not going to say there was any voter fraud, but there were 120,000 votes that were cast through the drive-in balloting system where they had carloads of people that were voting.
It's pretty interesting. It's just one thing Rodney Ellis does. It's almost human ballot harvesting, where he has his buses and vans that drop people.
Yes, he was implicated in ballot harvesting. But it's amazing. We've got people that were in Washington, D.C. on January the 6th, and they're in jail without charges. We have proof that Rodney Ellis was involved in ballot harvesting, and he's still running Harris County.
No, but I think at least what happened just a few days ago was obviously inexcusable. But the positive, at least, piece is it showed why it was so important to fight for SB 1, because it was on full display for the nation to see why it's so important that we have those safeguards, because clearly they failed. It was an abject failure.
Of course, Ms. Longoria has resigned.
In a few months.
Yeah, but there's no guarantee we're going to get someone any better than that. This was a created position. Once again, going back to Lena Hidalgo and her able mentor, Rodney African Art Ellis. So
actually, one of the elected Democrats voted against, because it's not that it's just that she wanted an appointed position. It's that she chose someone based on political patronage over. There were candidates that had run elections before and they were passed over. I'm obviously still in favor of elected officials running the elections.
Well, that's the way it always used to be.
The even greater fault here is choosing someone based purely on political allegiance without any sort of competency or experience. And we've all suffered that this last few weeks.
If you're watching this on YouTube or if you're watching it on Facebook Live, please like and share. And of course, if you're on Raging Elephants Radio, share that too. We appreciate it very much. I see the chaplain, Tim Kelly, has joined us. Good to have you, sir. We've got a serious problem here with voter fraud in Harris County, and it's definitely been uncovered. I mean, what did they show up all of a sudden after the election is over? Oh, we found 10,000 more votes. It's insane in a primary election. It's insane on a level we've never seen before.
No, I mean, and there's people that conceded races that had stopped running a campaign for a week that you're now having to pick up. I mean, that is, inexcusable. And I just mean there's so many follow-on repercussions, and the damage that it does to trust and faith in the system. Is something that's not an easy light switch fix. So very supportive of our party's effort calling for a full audit. The fact that
there should be
push against that, to me, that defies reason. Obviously, they've approved to bring someone else in, but what that's going to look like, you'd think on this one, at least both sides would agree there should be a full audit. You need to have something that strong to restore faith in our process.
Well, I saw election audits where there were precincts that had 0 registered voters and hundreds of votes cast. Now, some people have postulated that that's because of the countywide voting thing, but I'm not sure you can chalk it up to that. It just looks highly suspicious to me.
Certainly an irregularity and something to be looked at a minimum.
So can we call you Alexandra Mueller? Is that okay? Or?
Wonderful.
Okay, great. Because the Del Morral thing makes it more difficult for me.
No, Alex is fine.
Okay.
So Mueller is my husband's last name, and very proud of that.
And you mentioned he's in the military also.
He was. So we both met at West Point.
At West Point. Mm-hmm. All right. Very good. It's not easy to get into West Point. In fact, it's not easy to get out of West Point.
It's more of it's the getting out of it that's a little more challenging piece. So. But I do feel like that has had a pretty big role. If you said, what's your kind of biggest impact? That certainly carries with me very strongly today, where there is that idea of service ingrained and integrity, and it's not just mouthpiece words. That obligation to conduct yourself in a manner consistent with duty on our country, something they just ingrain into you, whether you're wearing a uniform or not. And for me, this was just a chance to continue service. I'd spent the last 6 years working in oil and gas, great skill set on the finance side, but you do miss that feeling of working towards a greater goal. And watching oil and gas be just kind of run over by bad regulations.
Well,
supply demand was very demoralizing. And so having gone through that, plus seeing our county be torn in flames, it was just...
probably cost you $25 in gas to get here today.
It did. But it was just upsetting when you're just seeing these few actors have such a large impact. And I've, kind of made the case, and I think it's hard to refute it, that when you think about the damage Joe Biden has done to our foreign policy, it really set it.
Well, more specifically, Valerie Jarrett, I got to tell you, Joe Biden didn't decide what he was going to eat for breakfast this morning.
He was probably busy watching Matlock and having his juice. And
these are decisions that are made for him, you understand. Yes. That's why they have the Potemkin White House over in Delaware, so that he doesn't have to actually.
But nonetheless, it's his role and his position, and it's had a disastrous impact. And you can certainly look to Lena Hidalgo and see her impact on the county, and specifically what they're calling bail reform, which is really not bail reform. It's a wholesale attack on our criminal justice system. And so,
well, you mentioned the crime thing earlier. Right, Houston right now has set a new record for murders, and I think we're actually ahead of Chicago at this point in the number of murders.
I launched my campaign back in November and said, with these policies, with the starving of resources to our DA, to our law enforcement, and with this revolving door at the courthouse, Houston is not going to be known as the energy capital, but the murder capital. And I was called an alarmist for saying that in November, and it's a reality now.
Well, yes. Now you look more like a prophet.
And it's one of the things where you're not happy to be prophetic about it. But the reason it happened is because it is intentional. This wasn't some OG crimes up in the country. It's, no, we've really turned our county into this test lab of an extremely progressive view of the criminal justice system that values the liberty, really, of these violent offenders against all else. Really, the only people that are put behind bar are our law enforcement. That's something that I'm very passionate about. And so, it's really been topped on its head.
It's nuts what we're seeing here, and we've never seen anything like this.
The fact that they indicted 19 officers in Austin, one of them Justin Berry, 2 days before running for office, how is that not tipping the field in an election? It's shameful.
It is shameful. And I don't see any hope on the horizon unless it might be someone like you. Mm-hmm. Now, you did very well in the primary. You were a complete unknown, and yet you really came up in the vote. What do you attribute that to?
Something that's a little different. I'm sure some of your viewers follow this kind of model where, no one wrote what I said, like all of my issues and policies. So, now people are talking election integrity and these different, when I launched crime, election integrity, very strong stance, no mask mandates. These were just, and then I actually said lower taxes because I saw how much social programs and just pork, right, are in our budget, and started benchmarking it the same way I do to a public company as a banker. But all of those things where I just meant it was my own study, and these issues that I had, people thought were too conservative, but for you all, it'd be like, yeah, those are obviously.
Is it possible to be too conservative?
But I just meant, you look at when I was running with 9 people, no one had election integrity on their website. I don't know if they still do yet. So people, they'll pick up the headlines, but that's not core to some of the issues they care about. And I think that was just different. Was I didn't have to wait for the disasters. Could see that, hey, these are the things we need to be concerned about. And so that, I believe, motivated the grassroots, however you want to describe it, because it doesn't matter who I'm in the room with, I can have a conversation about these topics and not have to look to my left or right for a consultant to say, when you poll, that's not going to be so great. But just had a few core issues that I'm fine to keep that stance, and I still think I can win in the general, where I think a lot of people were really couching.
Well, I think if you make it to the general, I think you will win, because I think you're a refreshing alternative to what we currently have. I should mention here that Vidal Martinez was also appointed to be on the show, and he missed his interview. So,
but we felt pretty good. My dollar per vote was $8 versus Vidal's over $30. That was over
$30 a vote that he spent.
He spent over $1 million the last 2 weeks.
Yes.
So, and that was, my strength was really law enforcement came out behind me because of just talking to them. This is my plan to fix it. Not, crime is bad. We all agree, but these are the issues I'm seeing and how I think we can tackle it. In the military, one of the roles, it's not as exciting that I did, but I was our future operations officer. So did all the long range planning. And that's something that the county actually doesn't do. We only do planning 1 year. And when you think about how starved of resources these departments are, it takes a year for sheriff deputies to be, and then complete the academy, then another year of school, that we're only popping out 60 a year, that you really do need to take kind of a step back and figure out, what is a few years, how do we get to healthy? We're going to try to do everything as much as possible, but because of the critical crisis point we're at, it isn't going to be a quick, here's a few months of investing in something and we're going to get back to normal. I mean, she's done a lot of damage in a few years, and it's going to take probably that much time to get it to where we want. Can certainly stop the bleeding, once in office in the beginning, but that's a skill set I actually think is very useful, because I was figuring out how we sort all these deployments. So when Obama said there's a red line in Syria, which obviously, apparently there wasn't
more
a red
like
line.
A pink line, maybe slightly yellowish line.
Had the troops in Jordan, figuring out how we were going to staff it if that did go active. So there's I've just had a very varied career experience, whether, very operational on the military side, and then very finance technical in the private sector. And it just happens to line up very well with the county judge. And
well, you'd have 10 times the experience that the current county judge has.
Well, and actually, I would say...
even after she's been there a few years.
Well, I think what's really great now is she does have a track record, right? And a lot of these decisions were hers. Like Eva Longoria, that was her pick. She went against the elected officials. I mean, elected Democrats said, we think somebody else should do this. And so, same thing with bail reform. I mean, these are really her policies, and we're unfortunately suffering the consequences. But I think that is very helpful for the general, that she has been incredibly active, not in the ways that I'd want. Like I said, with Lena, she really did drive me into this race, because in the morning I dropped my daughter off, toddler. It's not my decision on whether she was masked. Lena made that for me.
Oh, gee, thanks.
And check next door, and it's like, what violent crime just happened? Where, I think...
Well, practically every day on next door, I see, murder in the apartment complex down the street.
The hot dog shop
drive-by shooting
a couple weeks ago was robbed at gunpoint. I mean, that never happens. It's just not. And to me, this idea that we're sacrificing such a core part of our life, there's no reason that kids can't go walk to the park by themselves.
But when you have unlimited illegal immigration and you don't punish crime, you don't put the bad guys in jail, this is what you get.
In our hospital, you can see that. They give it it's one thing that Democrats are great at, is they give things really nice titles. So you feel good about it. So if you look at Harris Health, they call them charity cases. It was over $700 million that we spent last year on charity cases. That's a nice name for everyone that's crossing the border illegally. Those are the dollars we pay that are not covered by Medicare, Medicaid, so non-U.S. citizens. And so to really start to wrap your head around how much of a burden we're paying in Harris County is pretty astronomical, because you have that hospital cost. Certainly we're paying for it in the schools on the per capita student, and then as well with crime. So human trafficking is an issue I'm also very passionate about, and you can't do anything as long as we're so starving the boots on the ground that we just don't have the law enforcement to be proactive the way that we should.
Well, something has got to change. We need someone like you in there, and you still got a runoff now that you're going to have to attend.
May 24th.
May the 24th. If you voted in the Republican primary, you can vote in that runoff on May 24th. It's very important that we get down there and do the job. I can tell you that your opponent, as we just discussed, has spent an incredible amount of money on this.
Yes. She just did a fundraiser with Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi for Women's Day. They will bring the might of the DNC and all of those dollars. And she's always been funded by out of state primarily. So the attacks... That should tell you something. These are not Houstonians, folks. So we've got a chance to set something right here, and I got to tell you, based on your experience, I think you'd be an excellent candidate. I think you'd do a really good job, and I think Harris County could be turned around again. I appreciate that, and one thing is, it's similar, I think, with our political beliefs on the conservative side, where I talk about being liberty-minded, and that means I don't know how to raise your kids better than you. I don't know how to practice your faith better than you or run your business, and that's where I think government really needs to step out. And on the same side, we had a lot of great talent in the county that was pushed out. So one of the things that they did is they fired almost every department head or made it very clear they weren't welcome here. And I very much plan to do everything I can to get that talent back.
Well, I know in our elections department right now, they fired every Republican that was there.
No, it's been a...
And I should mention...
County engineer, didn't know that had to be a partisan position.
It's not supposed
control,
to be.
Number 1, number 2, they're all out. Russ Poppy, Matt Z, very well respected. We brought in an outsider, so I just think, for me, I value people based on their skill set, right? I don't owe favors. I had a career in the private sector. I want to get as much of that great talent back, and we'll be, there's not going to be me in the dark corner passing out jobs. Commissioner Ramsey, Cagle, I've been endorsed by Steve Raddick.
Two good men. Yep. Commissioner Ramsey's professional engineer. Yep. Jack Cagle, Cactus Jack Cagle's been there for a long time.
It'll be a group effort here to figure out how do we get the most technical experts, those really skilled at running back, and start building the bench again. Because that's really what's frightening is that brain drain that's occurred.
Well, I should mention that up until the Democrats took over Harris County, we had run the elections here with elected officials, mostly Republican elected officials. The elections ran very smoothly. I worked as a poll judge, as an alternate judge, as a clerk, and in the old days, even as a poll watcher with the King Street Patriots. All of our elections were done in an organized manner. All of our vote counts came in on time. I remember one particularly bad election. That was the primary with Donald Trump. We didn't get all the voters done until very late at night, and I dropped off my ballots at 1 a.m. Where I was the poll judge. But this was because they just didn't anticipate how many people were going to have voting in that election. So we used to run these elections very well, and we did it with almost 100% volunteer help. There were only a few people that got paid to do it, and everyone else was volunteers, and there were people that did it because they cared about things. And I can tell you, as a Republican poll judge, when I had Democrats that came into my polling place and they needed help voting, I helped them vote the way they wanted to vote, which was usually Democrat. And it wasn't my job to tell them how to vote. It was my job to make sure they knew how to operate the equipment. Now we've got all brand new equipment that doesn't work very well. And we've got the most expensive election staff in the history of Texas. And we're getting the worst election results in the history of Texas. And by that, I don't mean that we elected the wrong people, the wrong party. I mean that they can't even get the job done. And this is why I believe that we could use someone else down there that's going to do a better job. And I think that person is very well Alexandra Mueller. And I really appreciate the fact you decided to step up because you, as you mentioned, you had a job, you had a life, you don't need this.
It is just such an amazing opportunity for impact. Nobody wants to be the janitor at the end of the night, right? Cleaning it up. I don't think we're there yet. I'm very optimistic. I'm strict financial conservative. They've blown through all of our savings where we always had good conservative governance. We had that $300 million rainy day fund. They've gone through that. And what makes me nervous, though, is the way they're spending. Even with this backdoor tax increase of 10% appraisal every year, so they don't have the dignity to raise the taxes, they just backdoor everybody. We're deficit spending now the last 2 years. And so for me, we are one of the most well-resourced counties in the country. We were that way under Ed Emmett when we only spent $3.5 billion.
Yeah, Ed Emmett was a great guy, and we didn't agree on everything, but we agreed on a lot of stuff.
But at least it was responsible governance,
Yes.
You could tell that things were being, and you're never going to get 100%.
But he was an adult. He knew how to run the office. He was doing it very well.
And we invested in infrastructure. We invested in law enforcement. And so for me, it was just the idea that it's just been so dramatically changed. But we are well-resourced. It's just they are funding all of the wrong things. You mentioned it with the elections, where, it's almost a 300% increase in a few years on the cost. That ballot is everywhere, every department, where instead of using volunteers or kind of the most qualified, We've added in more bureaucrats. So on the selfish side is I actually think you could dramatically improve things fairly easily. What I think is going to be challenging and what certainly keeps me running hard is the amount of work it's going to take to get it back to where we were just in 2018. But I do think we can make a very substantial increase right away. And there's not too many opportunities in life you have to turn the ship. I think another 4 years with Lena, though, we will see an exodus of law enforcement that we just can't recover from. We will raise taxes on a smaller and smaller population base, and we're going to load the county up on debt. And then we are Cooks County, Chicago, and it's probably going to take 20 years to fix it. So I do think it's that critical of a time where we're on the cliff and trying to mobilize everyone as possible, because we really can save it and show that, you can have a functional, great American city left here that represents all the things that we want.
Well, this is the fourth largest city in America right now, perhaps the third largest if we count it. Always
neck and neck with Chicago.
Yeah, it's well, I tell people here in Harris County we have roughly 7 million residents in the metro area. Yeah. And then if you count the illegal aliens, that's probably closer to 9 million. Yeah. So we may already be the third largest city in America. But we've got to have some policies that work. I want to mention your website, Alexandra Mealer, Mealer. AlexandraMealer.com is her website. You can go there and join Alex's army. Yeah. I like that. I like the fact that you come from a military family, as my father, my grandfather, and all three of my boys and myself, we've all served.
Thank your family for your service.
Somebody's got to do that. And I think the fact that you have done that also puts you head and shoulders above the other applicants for this office, because you've demonstrated. Nobody gets in the military for the money. No. You just don't do that. And
I think there are a lot of different types of service, but it is important to have a service track record because when you're going into politics, it should be with that service mindset. There's a lot of law enforcement, first responders that have it, various forms, but being able to point to that, I do think is a key characteristic that does matter.
Well, Alexandra Mealer, running for Harris County Judge. The runoff is March 24th?
Correct.
March 24th. If you voted in the primary, you can vote in the runoff. And that's why it's so important to get out and vote in primaries. And I'm still astounded at how many Republicans don't even understand how a primary election works. So I talked to some of my friends. They said, well, I always vote Republican. I said, you don't understand. It's a primary election. They're all Republicans. So now we have the runoffs. It's very, very important that you get out and do it. Her primary opponent spending 10 times the money, and he's got the money to spend. But if you guys are impressed as I am, I think Alexandra would do a great job, and I think maybe we could restore Harris County back to what it was 10 or 15 years ago. So on that note, I'm going to hit this break. We're going to be right back. We're going to talk about some other stuff, and I can't mention that on YouTube, this other stuff, but it has to do with mandates and lockdowns and all that kind of stuff. And we're going to talk to a friend of mine who's got all of the documentation you need if you're facing job loss, based upon some of those things that we can't talk about here on YouTube. Be right back on Right Side of the Mic. Like and share, like and share, like and share.